and welcome to Trade Finance Talks TV. I'm Mahika Ravishankar, Assistant Editor at Trade Finance Global, and we're here at Women in Trade Treasury and Payments 2025. I'm joined today by Gwen Mwaba, Managing Director of Trade Finance and Correspondent Banking at Afreximbank. Gwen, welcome to Trade Finance Talks.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself with relation to gender issues. Who are you, where are you from, what do you do, and what brings you to Women in Trade, Treasury and Payments?
Thank you so much. My name is Gwen Mwaba. I work for the African Export and Import Bank, heading trade finance across our 52 African member states and 12 Caribbean community member states. Now, I'm here at Trade Finance Global's Women in Trade, number one, because I'm a woman, and I love to support everything related to women, and I really want to be that voice and advocate for raising women up in careers, in homes, in business, in anything related to women entrepreneurship, even young girls who are aspiring to be something great one day. I want to be that perhaps role model or just an advocate or a helping hand.
Thanks so much for that. And I think that's a cause which unites a lot of the women in the room today. So I'm curious as to what a woman in trade looks like in some of the member states under Afreximbank's remit.
Yes, it's actually quite a diverse mix. Now, a woman in trade can range from a leader of a big organization, but here we're probably talking about the minority. The majority of women in trade in many of the emerging markets that we cover would be the woman that is, selling goods in a marketplace, or a street vendor, or that woman that is carrying cash across a border from one country to another to go and buy goods that are required in their country. And I think that is the majority of what women entrepreneurs look like. But I think also increasingly more recently, we're seeing, particularly in Africa, a lot of women going into farming. And this includes even very young women. Farming was not a very attractive sort of career a few decades ago.
Sorry, this is more of a recent development.
Young people going into farming, particularly females. And it's quite encouraging, and they're doing it so well.
So what are some unique challenges which these women face?
So I think in emerging markets, Africa particularly, there are a number of unique challenges which I think are very specific to a continent like Africa. I think some of those challenges include things like perhaps in some parts of Africa, a lack of access to education for young girls. Boys still tend to be favored. Even families would rather pay for the male child to go to school than the female children. And we also find that in some countries, the laws of the land don't really support women when it comes to, for example, property ownership or owning land. They still have archaic laws which need to be changed. There are certain inheritance laws in some parts of Africa where only the male child can inherit, for example, property from their parents. So these are quite specific and quite unique challenges when it comes to women in Africa. And leading from that, you then find that because the women are usually very small, the majority of women are very small entrepreneurs, they don't have access to financing, for example, because they haven't been trained in how to run a corporate organization, so therefore they don't meet the criteria that is required by banks. And if they can't sort of leverage through borrowing, then they can't grow their businesses and they stay small. Yeah.
That's just really fascinating to know, and I think important to consider the diversity of experiences between women in emerging markets and maybe some of the women in the room today. How would you say that various parties can come together to mitigate these divides?
First of all, I think, yes, there are certain themes that are common to women in emerging markets and also those in developed markets. I think childcare is one thing that is the bane of everybody's life. Everybody suffers from that, trying to balance family life and a work life. If you are, for example, in formal employment, I think that is something that affects all women across the globe, regardless of whether you're in a developed market or a developing one. So I think really speaking in one voice and advocating for us to be heard. Solutions around childcare, for example, in Western countries, for example, childcare is very expensive. In emerging markets, whilst childcare may be less expensive, People who don't have an extended family are still leaving their children at risk in some instances, through having to hire quite lowly paid staff. So maybe the children are not safe. We've heard in some countries where nannies have ran away with, the children of the home. So I think these commonalities, we all just need to speak with one voice so that governments, non-governmental organizations can come together and advocate for solutions for women globally so that we are not crowded out of the workplace because we have to give up work to look after our own children, or even become bigger entrepreneurs so that we can spend more time on our business without having to worry about, are my children safe in the environment that they are being left in.
And I guess as a follow-up to that, what kind of initiatives have Afreximbank been carrying out to make the world of trade, treasury and payments one that's more inclusive for women?
I think as an organization, Afreximbank, if you look, I would say in the last decade, there's a lot more female faces visible as faces of the organization. That's because a lot more females have been put into leadership positions, for one thing. It wasn't always the case. So we're seeing that deliberate push and intention to recognize females, not because they're female, but because they're talented, they're experienced, they're qualified for the roles that they play, and women are being given that opportunity. And then externally, we also have programs that sort of support women. For example, we have an SME financing program where we deploy our liquidity to SMEs through other financial institutions. And that's important because when you look at the composition of SMEs, they're largely women-owned businesses. So we're quite intentional in making sure that we support that market segment.
Great, thanks so much for that. And I think just to finish things off, is there a call to action you have for the industry? How can we move the pace of progress forwards?
I would say my call to action for the industry and those who are interested in joining the industry is don't be afraid to put yourself forward. When you see opportunities, apply for those opportunities, put yourself out there so that you can be recognized and absorbed and welcomed into this very exciting and fast-growing industry, I would say, the world of trade, treasury and payments. We're seeing a lot more women, even in the room today. There's a lot more women than what we had a few years ago.
Thanks so much, Gwen. And I think for me, the biggest takeaway is maybe recognizing those points of commonality which bind women in trade, treasury and payments across the world, and understanding that you're not fighting different battles with women in emerging markets, you're all working towards the same end goal. So that unified effort, I think, is really important.
Absolutely right. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for joining me.